Lots of ground to cover here in a short time, so let's all get seated now, please. While we're doing that, let me just kind of quickly acknowledge or lay out the evening so you have an idea of what our structure is going to be. I am Fran Bradley, by the way. I'm a past legislator, so I have a little bit of an idea of what these candidates are going through. I always say how grateful I am, and I hope that you feel the same way, regardless of who you support. Isn't it wonderful that people have the courage to put their necks out there to be the family to run? Thank you. Okay, that's the last nice thing we're going to say about them now. That's not true. What we're going to do, the first hour is going to be sort of the traditional approach. Each of the candidates will be asked to make sort of a self-introduction and maybe tell us why they believe that they should be the person who would be our next governor. And don't you think it's time to put someone with common sense in the seat for governor? Amen to that, huh? Each of them will have 6 minutes. We have a timekeeper here. And then there'll be time for, we hope, at least some questions that we've gotten from people that will be posed by our MC, Senator Dave Senja. And then the second half is something unique. One of our executive committee members came up with it. The tables that you see around here have a function in addition to just being a place for literature to be. In the second half, each of you should have received the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you look at the tables, you'll see table 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. When we begin the second half, you'll be asked to go to the table, that number that you have. For whatever time, and it'll depend on how much time we have, but probably about 6 minutes or so, you'll have an opportunity in a very small group to visit with that gubernatorial candidate. And we're going to ask you to please, when you visit, ask questions. Don't make speeches to them. This is about learning from them. So ask questions of them, spend that time. A bell will ring, and then you'll move to the next table. So if you were at table 4, you go to 5. If you're at 5, you go to 1, and so forth. And so we'll do that in enough time so that everybody has an opportunity to be in a small table setting with just a few people to have more of a personal visit. So that'll be kind of how our evening is going to be structured. With that, and I'm anxious to get going, I want to turn it over to the person who will be our MC for the first part of the program, whom all of us know as a dear friend, and certainly, in my opinion, one of those people who sets the example as a public servant. My good friend, your good friend, the Honorable Senator Dave Senja.
Well, there's no honor here, I'll tell you that. Friday night, Rochester, we're having fun. Who wants to elect a new governor? All right? Let's just start by all agreeing on that. You know, we need a change in the corner office. There's no question about it. And tonight's the beginning of that journey. And as I thought about this a little bit, and I may be wrong, check my math, but we're something like 52 and a half weeks away from an election in Minnesota. And we all know elections make differences. There's no question about that. And so tonight, at least in Rochester, Minnesota, starts that journey, a journey to which we're going to elect a Republican governor to occupy that corner office and to take us forward, not only as individual people, but certainly as a state. And so that's exciting. And I look forward to our conversation here tonight with our gubernatorial candidates, and certainly all the days and weeks ahead as this thing unfolds. This is extremely important to the state of Minnesota. What we got going now, this little machine is not running very well. And we need to put some grease on it. And the way we do that certainly is having our guy, if you will, our woman, whoever it turns out to be, I don't know, in the corner office. That's important. And that's our goal. That's where we're going. Let me just start out, and I'm going to have to get my list for sake of not forgetting anybody. But there, I would say, are some notables in the audience here tonight, which we certainly want to recognize. And maybe you could just stand. Maybe we just hold our applause till the end. And I'll start with a couple of has-beens, but maybe who knows what the future is going to be. Has-been Fran Bradley. You never know Randy Demmer. Randy. We've got some legislators here. Mike Benson, a candidate for Congress. Mike, welcome. State Senator Carla Nelson. Carla's here. Okay. Representative Dwayne Quam. Dwayne, there you are. I think I saw Representative Drazkowski and Steve, welcome. Good to see you. Another First District congressional candidate, Jim Hagedorn. Jim, you're here someplace. Good, welcome. A candidate for state auditor. Important job. Randy Gilbert. Randy, where are you? Someone who is seeking to replace Mike Benson as he's elected to Congress, Nels Pearson. Nels, good to have you. And I'm going to take a little prerogative. There are some people in here not running for office, but which I have two people, an awful lot of admiration for. A lot of admiration. There's two women sitting right down here that have taken the Governor Dayton and maybe most of the country to its knees with respect to daycare unionization. Jennifer Parrish, Jackie Harrington, will you stand up? All right. Talk about people who know how to fight the good fight and frankly win the war, and that's important. So let's get going. You don't need to hear a lot more from me. Oh, I got 5 more pages. I'm not going to use them. Let's call our candidates up and get this show on the road in order of their grandmother's maiden name. Kurt Zellers, come on up. And David Thompson, come on up. And Jeff Johnson, come on up, Jeff. Good to see you. And Scott Honor. Scott, welcome. And Rob Farnsworth. Rob, there you are, okay. Good. Welcome all to Rochester. I'm not going to give you the Rochester speech, but you're in a good town with some good people, and we look forward to having you with us, not only tonight as you are, but giving us a little bit better idea of who you are, and as Fran indicated, maybe why you want to run for governor and want to, frankly, and will be one of you elected governor of the state of Minnesota. That's exciting to me. So why don't we just, maybe in the order of Kurt, you want to just start out at 6 minutes. We've got the timer there, and it's your show for 6 minutes. Oh, why don't you just go there? We'll save some time if you do. And don't time is technical part here, okay.
There you go. Oh, yeah.
Good to go. All right.
There's a joke in there for you about being a House member, Dave. But well, thank you everybody for coming. Thanks to all the candidates for being here as well. But more importantly, a Friday night in the middle of football season. There's probably some hockey someplace, maybe a little bit of baseball. Thank you all for coming out. It's critically important for us as candidates to have your support, not just next year, but this year as we're getting ready and ramping up. I'm running for 2 very simple reasons. Number one, I want to make sure that not only is it a great future for my kids, my grandkids, but for yours as well. Minnesota over the last year now with Governor Dayton and the DFL legislature has just screamed to the left. Whether it's a daycare unionization, whether it's property tax, a tax on utilities, tax on your farm equipment that can just as easily go over the Iowa border, get fixed and then come back to avoid the sales tax. Or one of the worst ones, I've yet to hear in the rest of the country, a warehousing tax. So for just storing something in a building, you now are going to get charged sales tax thanks to Governor Dayton, with a promise that was supposed to be just a bunch of rich people that none of us know. We're just going to tax all those rich people. We're going to take all their money and we're going to give it to the rest of us. Yet we see tax after tax after tax hurting hardworking Minnesotans and regressive taxes that hurt them the most. So I want to make sure that not only is there a great opportunity for Reagan and Will, but for your children, your grandchildren, nieces, nephews, because what we're seeing right now is going to drive businesses out of our state. We're looking at a high tax rate, we're looking at high regulation, we're looking at a government that is so complicated and so confusing that business owners look at it, and instead of making a decision with their heart, which they usually do, our families are here, I'm from here, that's why I want to stay in Minnesota, they're now making a decision with their pocketbook. And maybe Iowa is 6% cheaper. Maybe Wisconsin, with their new property tax cut over there, not only is it cheaper, but now I'm going to get a little bit more back in my pocket. Those are decisions, folks, that we are going to have under Governor Dayton if he gets another term. And make no mistake about it, this is a 10-year decision. If Governor Dayton is able to get elected and keep the legislature, we will be in a downward spiral for 10 years. They held back this last couple of years. They have a $10.25 minimum wage. They have new taxes on your businesses, whether it be accounting, whether it be legal services, that will make it even more expensive to do business here. And we just can't have that happen. I want to make sure that Reagan and Will build their business or go to work for a great Minnesota company here. One of the ways we do that is that we start to develop our own natural resources. Many of you have heard this before, but if you haven't, it's very important. We have one of the best natural resource deposits, copper and nickel, in the world, one of the largest, sitting right up on the Iron Range, right in the middle of all the taconite fields, so it's not new development, it's not some brand new development that's going to have to take years to develop, but it's right there waiting for us. Governor Mark Dayton and his liberal environmentalist friends are stopping that from happening. As governor, it will be the first thing I focus on, opening up those mines. And it's just not the mines themselves, it's the spin-off job. So back to your kids and grandkids. They go to the University of Minnesota, they get a degree in engineering, and they want to develop the spin-off plant for that new copper mine. Or maybe it's the taconite, maybe it's the palladium or titanium that goes into tools or into computers. That can be done right here in Minnesota. The North Dakota oil fields will pale in comparison to what we have here. And as Republicans, that's where we do best, when we lead on the issues. Ronald Reagan's commercial, how many remember It's Morning Again in America? Still makes my skin just bubble up because I think of how it gave you the enthusiasm about what's great about America, not what's bad. Mark Dayton and Barack Obama have built their political careers, not just elections, on dividing us against each other. It's just not right. Lastly, the main reason I'm running is to beat Mark Dayton, if you couldn't tell by my first part of my speech. And it's because that's one thing that I can say, with all due respect to my fellow Republicans up here, is I sat across the table from Mark Dayton. And when he shut down government for 21 days, saying, you're going to buckle, you will raise taxes. I promise you, you will raise taxes. And I said to the governor, we're not raising taxes. Now, you may not like why we got elected a majority, and believe you me, we sure didn't want you to be elected governor. But we were elected with a mandate to balance the budget without raising taxes and make government smaller. By the time we were done, a $5.5 billion budget deficit was turned into a $3.4 billion surplus. That's something to run on. That's something that Minnesotans will see and respect. Not confusing things about tax policy, not confusing things about regulatory relief or Obamacare or MNsure. But if you balance a budget without raising taxes, hardworking Minnesota business women and men will provide the necessary dollars we need to run government. And afterwards, then we can do like Scott Walker. We can offer property tax relief. We can cut our sales tax down. We can be competitive with not only the Dakotas and Iowa and Wisconsin, but we can start to compete with those right-to-work states like Indiana, South Carolina, North Carolina, and actually bring those jobs back. Because when it's a level playing field, we all do better. We as Minnesota will work harder, we'll work smarter, we'll do a better job, but we've got to have a chance. So I'm asking for your support today. We'll be out on the campaign trail. I've spent 20 years next year campaigning in the great state of Minnesota. I was lucky as a kid right out of college to work for a great man, God rest his soul, Rod Graham. So I've seen the great state of Minnesota. I know there's great potential out there, but we've got to get government off your back, out of your pocket, and out of your way. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here tonight.
Thank you, Kurt Sellers. On to State Senator Dave Thompson. David?
Thank you, Senator Senjum. Good to see you. Good to see all you folks. I appreciate you coming out. I've told many of you as I've spoken to you this evening that this is a team sport. And you can count on a team that's willing to show up over a year before the general election. Now, I know many of you. I've gotten to know a lot of you over the years, and it's been a great pleasure. For some of you that don't know me, I am a lifelong Minnesotan, grew up as a little tyke in Little Falls, Minnesota. My parents divorced when I was 11. We moved to East Grand Forks, where I graduated from high school, and then found a farmer's daughter to marry, who is here tonight. Rhonda, those of you who listen to me on the radio know her as the frugal Mrs. Thompson, and it's wonderful to have her here to support me. I appreciate all that she has done for me, because believe me, it's doing something like this is a commitment to the whole family, and I'm very appreciative of that. And it's a commitment for you. But I'm here to tell you that it's a worthwhile commitment. We had a rough time in November of 2012. That was an election that many of us would prefer to forget. I know it was one of the toughest nights I've ever experienced on an election night, if not the toughest. And I think many of us woke up and have gone on for weeks and months afterwards being a little discouraged. But I'm done being discouraged, because it's time to look forward, and it's time to move ahead, and it's time to find some optimism. But it's time to find optimism not just as people that are engaged in a political battle, but as people that are truly conservatives. And for too long, we conservatives in Minnesota have been getting told to sit down and shut up. And I'm not prepared to do that anymore, because we have a winning message. And you ask me, how do I know that we have a winning message? Because oftentimes we are told that we don't have the winning message. Now, that doesn't surprise me coming from Democrats. After all, we know that they support bureaucrats over people. We know that they support union bosses over workers. We know that they support these things. But unfortunately, I sometimes hear pessimism about moving the conservative agenda from within our own ranks. Some of the so-called business community, political elites in St. Paul, sometimes even activists. But I'm here to tell you that we can win because it's being done in other states around the country. I want you to think about Michigan for a moment. The founding place for the United Auto Workers. When you think of Michigan, you think of Detroit, you think of, well, unfortunately lately, you think of fiscal mismanagement and bankruptcy. But when I was growing up, you think of the big automakers and you think of the United Auto Workers. Well, I'm guessing that when Rick Snyder was running for governor and brought up this idea that we can become a right-to-work state, that a lot of the naysayers says, oh, that's too radical. We can't go that far here in Michigan. I don't happen to believe that. We now have 24 right-to-work states in this country, and that is the way to go. That is where the jobs are being created. That is where the economy is becoming healthy, and families have fathers and mothers with jobs, and prosperity, and a good future, and the ability to pay for college. All you've got to do is look a little to the east, to Wisconsin, the birthplace of the labor movement by many people's estimation, and the founding area for progressivism. But we've got conservative leadership over there that was not afraid to take the mantle and say we can slow down this rush of public union power that is making our state budget unmanageable, taking a disproportionate share of our resources. They did it. If Wisconsin did it, if Michigan did it, other states have done it. Wisconsin did it, or pardon me, Indiana did it under Mitch Daniels. We can do it here in Minnesota. And I'm done hearing about 2012. I'm done hearing about what we can't do. I'm done talking about the things that we can't accomplish and how we can't move the conservative agenda forward. I don't believe it. I not only don't believe it because we have examples of doing it the right way, I believe it because I've already traveled thousands of miles in this state. And yes, I've spoken with a lot of conservatives and a lot of Republicans. But I've spoken with a lot of people from all across the political spectrum. And when I look them in the eye and say, sir, ma'am, do you care about all children in Minnesota having access to a quality education? Do you care about making sure that your neighbors are not having trouble paying their bills because dad's out of work? Are you concerned about the future of our pension system that is blowing up? Folks, these are not Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative issues. These are common sense Minnesota issues. And what we've got to be courageous to do as Republicans and conservatives is to go out and admit what we are and tell people what we are with kindness and caring and a sense of compassion. We are good people. We don't abandon our young, our old, and our infirm. But we also expect those that contribute to contribute. So I'm here asking for your support. By the way, I will abide by the endorsement. I believe strongly in our system. I believe strongly in the activists that have built this party. And I also believe that we have the best chance of winning if we coalesce around one of the five of us in May rather than in August. I'll be happy to see you on the campaign trail. We'll be going all over the state, and I will continue to do this until the campaign is over. Thank you, folks, for putting this event on and for having us. I look forward to further discussion tonight and seeing you in the days to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Thompson, and now former state representative and now Hennepin County Commissioner Jeff Johnson. Jeff, welcome.
Thank you. This isn't fair because I'm the only one with a little stage, but I'm going to take advantage of that. So thank you all for being here, and thank you for everything you do for the party, especially those of us who, well, all of us almost have been on the ballot, and we know that it's the folks like you who get us elected. So we really do appreciate that. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jeff Johnson. I grew up in Detroit Lakes. My wife is from Crookston. We went to Concordia College up in Moorhead. Spent a few years away in Washington, D.C. and Chicago. And then about 20 years ago, we moved back home to Minnesota, my wife and I. We've been in Plymouth for about 18 or 19 years. We've got two boys. Thor is 15 and Rolf is 12. I've spent the majority of my adult life in the private sector, both as an employee and as a self-employed business owner. And during that time, I also served 6 years in the Minnesota House And now for the last nearly 5 years, I've been the often lone, often loud voice of some level of fiscal sanity in the state's largest county, what I call the wilderness of Hennepin County. And I'm seeking your endorsement for governor, and I will abide by that endorsement because I think it matters. And I think, as Dave just said, it is our best path to victory as Republicans next year. And I'll tell you what, I am a Norwegian Lutheran from northern Minnesota, so I don't get really worked up about a lot of things, fairly calm. But I watched this last session, and it really got to me. I don't know about you guys, but I got angry many times as I was watching that session on a lot of different levels. But really the bottom line for me, Thor is going to be looking at college in a year. Rolf won't be far behind him. I don't know where they're going to go to college, where they're going to start their careers, but I really want them to make the same decision that Sandy and I made and to come back here at some point. I want them to raise my grandkids here and take care of me when I'm old and cranky and infirm. And I am really concerned that if we don't change the direction we're headed in this state, there's not going to be a great incentive for them to do that. This will be a different place in 10 or 15 years if we keep going the same route that we're on right now. And, you know, I watch Governor Dayton, and I happen to think that he's a decent man who's trying to do what he thinks is best for the state. I just couldn't disagree with him more as to what's best for the state. His whole focus is on government. How do we get more money into government? How do we get more power to government? How do we give government more influence over every little piece of our lives? My focus as governor would be very different from that. Really, 3 goals I would have. Number 1 is the business climate, and that has to be job number 1 for the next governor. Minnesota created the fewest number of new businesses in the country last year per capita. In fact, DC was in the study. We came in 51st. And that was before the session of this year, so it's not going to get any better. We cannot afford to continue to just roll over for Wisconsin and North Dakota and South Dakota. They are literally stealing our entrepreneurs, and we are a better place to live. We've just made it so unwelcome for people to start or expand their business here. So my goal would be to actually start competing with those businesses, or with those states, and become the best place to start or expand a business, at the very least in the upper Midwest. That's job number 1. Number 2, I don't know if any of you follow the education achievement gap, but that's the discrepancy in graduation rates between white students and students of color. It's the worst in the country in Minnesota. And it has been on and off for almost 30 years, and we have been wringing our hands about that and throwing money at it for almost 3 decades, and we haven't changed a dang thing. I will take that head on, and I think that's what is needed. And probably that means a rather public battle with the education establishment and the teachers union about parental empowerment and real school choice. But I'm happy to have that battle because I just think it's unconscionable that we're willing to give up on 10 to 15% of our kids because of where they live or because of how poor their parents are. And then number 3 is really just an extension of my life on the county board, and that is a focus on some level of fiscal sanity in the state of Minnesota. Minnesotans are very generous. I think most of us are absolutely willing to pay taxes to help the less fortunate get on their feet. But the problem is so many of the programs we fund don't produce that result, and in fact they actually hurt the people we claim we want to help more than we help them. And my goal would be on day 1 as governor to start a top to bottom, probably 4-year audit of the programs that taxpayers fund in this state. We'll start with our human service programs, and the ones that can actually prove through measurement that they're doing what we claim we want them to do, moving people off of welfare to self-sufficiency, for example, we'll celebrate those programs. But the ones that can't, the ones that we fund because it makes us feel good to fund them, we're going to end those programs, and we're going to demand that government start focusing taxpayer dollars on programs that actually produce real results. Those are my 3 goals as your governor. I'm a pretty focused guy. I'm not going to get distracted by shiny objects that fly around St. Paul, and we'll get that done. And before I close, though, I want to ask one thing of you, and I've asked this at every one of the candidate forums that we've had. I want you to, as you listen to us or as you're talking to us in our little speed dating tables later on, I want you not just to approach this as the Republican activists that we all are, but actually put yourself in the shoes of your independent or maybe even DFL neighbors. Because we need a huge chunk of independents and probably even a few DFLers to actually win. Those are just the numbers in this state. And that doesn't mean we compromise our principles or try to blur the lines. I've never done that, and frankly, it doesn't work for us. But it requires that we recognize that we need to pick a candidate who not only can share a positive conservative vision, but can actually create a meaningful personal connection with individuals in Minnesota. So I just ask you to put on your neighbor's shoes and take a look at us that way, because I think that's how we're going to win the race next year. Thank you all again for being here, and I'd appreciate your support.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And now, Mr. Scott Honor. Scott, welcome to Rochester.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm a businessman, not a politician, so this is my first race. But as I've traveled around the state the last several months, I've learned a few things. I've heard from folks that they hear politicians doing a lot of talking, promising, saying that they'll stand on principle. But at the end of the day, our agenda is not getting passed. And as a result, Minnesota continues to underachieve its potential. And I'm worried that Minnesotans, especially our children, won't have the same sort of opportunities that we've had. I feel like I've lived the American dream. When I was born in Fridley, my parents lived in a trailer park. In high school, my dad lost his job and lost his pension. But at the same time, I became an Eagle Scout, and I went on to become the first person in my family to graduate from college. I paid my way through school by working minimum wage jobs, including having a job shoveling horse manure every morning. That's a skill I'm looking forward to using in St. Paul. And I went on to have a career in business and created success. By the way, Governor Dayton and his Rockefeller ex-wife have already attacked me for that success. How's that for irony? I want to take that success now and give it back to the state. And I want to make sure that everyone has the same sort of opportunity that I've had. That's why I'm running for governor. I'll present Minnesotans with a clear vision of where we want to go and how our policies will make their lives better. I'll take a very different approach to how we tax, spend, and budget. And I'll look at state programs and ask the question of, why is state government doing this? Is it the right policy? Is it the right priority? Could we get a better result if we did things in a different way? You know, I've watched what seems to be an entire generation of politicians on both sides of the aisle spend their time squabbling over budget numbers. Should we spend a little more? Should we spend a little less? Instead of focusing on what are the key principles, the right priorities, and the results that we want to get. I think all you have to do is look at this Viking Stadium fiasco to see the dysfunction in St. Paul. I mean, here you have the governor get out negotiated by the Wilfs, then decide to do his due diligence after the deal's signed. In the meanwhile, we have a funding plan that's a complete pipe dream that somehow gets onto the floor of a Republican-controlled House and Senate, passes, gets passed by the governor, and now you got the governor running around the state encouraging everyone to gamble and smoke. I mean, what the heck's going on here? We need to have a focus on results. And I'll tell you, I think Republicans have had a great opportunity to showcase how our principles can create better results, and we've squandered that opportunity. Republican politicians didn't pass true education reform. They didn't get rid of LIFO. They didn't make sure that we had a path to pay teachers for performance. They didn't make sure that we had real school choice offered to parents and students. I will. Our Republican politicians didn't reform health care. They didn't make sure that Minnesotans have the best, most affordable health care that didn't require government intervention. They didn't tighten out Medicaid eligibility requirements. They didn't make sure that Medicaid recipients were incentivized to improve their own wellness. They didn't push for private sector alternatives that would reduce costs. I will. They didn't reform taxes. They didn't bring about tax rate reduction, tax code simplification, regulatory reform, right to work status in this state that would help us grow jobs and raise wages. I will. And they didn't restructure government. They didn't reduce administrative costs. They didn't tackle this underfunded pension liability. I'll do that as well. Now look, I know business is not the same thing as government, but there's a lot of parallels. It starts with focusing on results, not dollars. And then it means setting a vision, making sure that there's a specific plan, making sure that there's a team in place that can execute that plan, getting everyone on board, getting those hard sells convinced that the plan makes sense, making sure that we have the right culture in government. I would say that's having a culture of seeing government as serving its citizens as the customers and owners of government. And then finally, measuring results and reporting those results. Those are the things I'll do as governor. And I'll take on these big things without focusing on how to get reelected. I'll make sure that our priorities are to get the state on track, to get our party back on track, and get great results for all Minnesotans. And ultimately, I see that meaning having a government that's smaller, but that does the things that it needs to do better. I look forward to getting to know all of you. I look forward to working together to win the governorship. I look forward to making the star of the North the star of the nation. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Scott. And now, Mr. Rob Farnsworth. Rob, welcome.
Thank you. And as I was sitting here, I was thinking about the fact that I'm a teacher from Hibbing, and I get to run for governor. And it kind of choked me up that this is the country that we live in, that this is the dream of America. And I hadn't planned on saying this, but I've heard their three speeches a number of times, so I sort of daydreamed. No offense, guys. I only heard Scott once. But it's humbling. I mean, there are legislators here, current and retired, and I'm humbled, so thank you for allowing me to be here. So now I'll get to the practice part. You all should have a picture on your seat, or Joe would have handed out. That's a picture of my family. I'm the newest candidate in the race. Most of you know very little about me, so I'll tell you a little bit. That is my family. That's my wife, Jamie, my children, Hannah, Isaac, and Abigail. And just so you know, my oldest is 5 today, so I'm sacrificing her birthday to be here with you. So I don't know what that means, but it apparently means something to me. I live in Hibbing. I'm a special education teacher, and my wife is a registered nurse. I'm a graduate of the University of St. Thomas with a bachelor's degree in history. I got my master's degree in special education from Mankato, and I am a bit of a rarity. I grew up in Minnesota's Iron Range, the son of a 33-year union miner. I'm a union teacher who used to be local union president, and my wife is a union nurse, and somehow I managed to remain a constitutional Republican. As a union member, though, I do want to say I spoke with the ladies about the child care unionization. I am embarrassed for my union and all unions that they are pushing to force private businesses to become unions. And Dave and I probably will have some disagreements over the course, and maybe the rest of the guys, of unions. But I'm embarrassed. As a union member, that gives us all a black eye, and I know I'm not the only one. So, when you think about your bottom moment, or the bottom of the barrel, whatever, when you think of politics, and boy, I really hit the bottom, this stinks. Most people think of 2012 because it was unheard of that Comrade Obama got reelected. But my bottom moment actually was in 2011, and that's what starts the story for me running for governor. In 2011, my friend Paul Jacobson ran in a special election up in the Hibbing area, and in a special election, we expected that he probably would lose because it's Hibbing, but we also thought that he might get somewhere over 40, maybe even 42%. He ended up getting 35%, and I was disgusted. I went home, and I told my wife, that's it, we're moving to Texas. I'm going to find a job, and we're out of here. Fortunately, she said, sleep on it. I woke up the next morning, and I thought, why should I have to move my family? I want my kids to grow up near Grandma and Grandpa and aunts and uncles. I want to be buried in the same cemetery that my mom is buried in, which is probably kind of weird, but I don't want to leave Minnesota. And so what can I do to make it possible for me to stay and for my kids to stay? Because of the way things are going, my kids aren't going to stay. Why would they? They're not going to be able to find a job. If they do, it's probably going to be for the government because they're expanding the size of government. So I thought about, as governor, what could I do to make Minnesota a better place for my kids? Now, of course, everybody talks about lower taxes and deregulation. And those things are important, and I'm in favor of that. If you ask any business leader, That's the first thing they say. We have to have lower taxes, lower regulation. But they point to a couple of other areas. They say when they think about expanding or opening a business in a state, one of their considerations is public safety. And when I think of the Minnesota, when I was a child versus the Minnesota now, I'd say Minnesota is probably not as safe as it was. And the governor cut $100 million from the public safety budget. So one of my focuses would be public safety. And I think of public safety from the womb all the way through natural death. And I talk about abortion, I talk about it everywhere I go because I'm concerned that people in our party are saying, after we lost the marriage amendment, they're saying we need to stop talking about these social issues. They're too controversial. It's the first time in 15 years that more people in America are pro-life than pro-choice. It's not time to stop talking about it, especially in a state that had 10,702 abortions. As governor, I will fight, at the very least, to limit late-term abortions, but hopefully to limit all abortions in Minnesota. That is a fundamental right of public safety. Another area that I'm passionate about public safety because I actually used to work in Red Wing at the correctional facility where there's a fairly large sex offender program. I'm passionate about keeping our kids safe from sex offenders. And when there's this discussion about what do we do with the 600 sex offenders in St. Peter, my question is, why would we ever consider putting our children at risk by letting them out? Now I understand there are constitutional issues. I'm down to 1 minute, holy smokes. All right. Well, hopefully you'll ask a question about education later. As governor, I would sign into law a bill that would mandate life in prison for anybody that sexually molests a child. These are people who cannot be fixed. And it's cheaper to put them in a regular prison than to spend $90,000 a year in St. Peter. I didn't realize I was running out of time, so I'm going to ask for your support. I'm sure I'll answer a ton of questions as we go, and thank you again for having me here.
Thank you so much, Rob. We're now going to move into the question and answer section of the program, and I would simply add, as we move into it, should you have questions, I don't know, write them on your hand or something that you have. Maybe Bruce Cascabar back there will pick them up and we can deal with them up here. I do have several, so we can get started. The first one, I think we'll start with Jeff Johnson, is what would you consider to be the top 2 issues going forward? And this is for 1 minute, so they're sort of going to roll these pretty quick.
Well, I actually touched on them, I think, in my opening. I think absolutely the number 1 priority, for me at least as governor, would be the jobs climate, the business climate. And in order for us to actually start competing with the states that we need to compete. By the way, when I was growing up, a big concern in northwestern Minnesota was all of the North Dakota kids were moving from North Dakota to Minnesota. And it's actually the other way around now. The world's kind of upside down. That absolutely has to change. And to me, that means rather significant overall tax reform, being more competitive in our tax rate. It means regulation reform. It means right to work. It means lawsuit reform, something that I worked at a lot when I was in the legislature. And it means ending this obsession that the governor has with trying to coax businesses here by providing subsidies at the expense of the 99.9% of the businesses that don't get those subsidies. So that's number 1. And then number 2 for me is education broadly, but more specifically that achievement gap. And I really do think we need to address that rather aggressively.
Good. Thank you, Jeff. And then we'll move on. Kurt Zellers?
I would agree with Jeff. It's Minnesota competitiveness. We've got a great business climate. As Republicans, we need to be careful not to talk down our great state. I mean, this is the home of Mayo Clinic, of 3M, Best Buy, Cargill. You name a number of different companies in this great state. But when we're uncompetitive, it's going to make people take that second look. One of the things that we actually convinced Governor Dayton to sign into law, we passed it with a freshman member from up in Roseville, Minnesota, Dan Fabian, was that unlimited permitting reform. Brought it down from whenever we got done with it, down to 90 days. And if at the end of that 90 days, a bureaucrat couldn't say for some reason or other why the permit was being delayed, the permit was approved. That's real reform. That's what brings businesses into our state. But more importantly, it what helps our business owners who are already here make that decision to expand. She may decide now I'll add on the extra 10,000 feet. Or he may decide we will add that second route on our sales team. And secondly is, of course, the education gap. My wife Kim's a public school teacher. She's up back at home with the kids, but we need to talk more about education reform.
Thank you. And moving on, let's go to Rob Farnsworth.
I'm glad you asked for two, because I had two things left that I wanted to talk about in my I'm passionate about education. I'm a teacher, and I think that we're getting education all wrong. We're trying to prepare 100% of our students as though they're going to go to a four-year college and university. 71% will go on and do something, two-year, four-year technical. We need a college education system similar to the European system, where kids walk out of high school with skills that they will actually use, instead of trying to prepare every single student for high school. And I've said this before, the Democrats are really good at taking the crappy ideas from Europe and trying to bring them here, like healthcare. Why don't we take the good ideas like their education system? The other area that I think is fundamental to state government is the transportation. And I am not in favor of light rail that is high on subsidy and low on ridership. I'm in favor of reallocating money from that to improve the roads that actually exist, to improve the roads that people will actually use. So I think, kind of to go back to what I said, public safety, education, and transportation are three fundamental areas of state government.
Thank you. And Dave Thompson.
Well, I'd like to talk in terms of a couple of principles that are important to me. One is that we always elevate the individual over the state, and the two is that we enforce the idea of personal responsibility. And if you keep those two priorities in mind, the policy kind of takes care of itself. Because if we elevate the individual over the government, we decrease regulation in our economy, and we create a competitive atmosphere in which we have healthy jobs and people are succeeding and doing well and starting and moving their businesses and growing them here in Minnesota. If we believe in elevating the individual over the state, we have competition in education through the form of tuition tax credits or vouchers, so that people are not imprisoned by a public school system that fails them in many areas of the state. We believe in personal responsibility, and we believe in elevating the individual over the government. Then that takes care of things like a public pension system that should become rather than a defined benefit system, a defined contribution system, so that you put in what you want to put in, you get a rate of return, and you take it back out. If we live by those ideas and those principles, the policies tend to take care of themselves.
Thank you. And I see Scott on. Scott?
Thanks. Fargo's outgrown Moorhead 7-1 since 1980. We're losing taxpayers to the tune of $1 million of annual income leaving the state every single day, and that's been going on for a decade. Our state ranks 50th in startups. Jobs have to be top priority. Now, I know something about creating jobs. I started a company, a technology company that today has over 100 employees. Over the last decade, I raised $4 billion of equity and bought 60 companies around the country. So I get what goes on in business. We have to have real tax reform, regulatory reform, bring right to work status to this state, make sure that we're competitive and that we lead the region in job growth and economic growth. My second priority would be education. We have to make sure that our students have a great path to have a career, and that means a career, not just a job, or a chance to go to college. And so that means bringing real overhaul to the education system. So those would be my priorities.
Okay, thank you. Next question then, and we'll start, we'll start with Dave Thompson. David, how can Republicans win across the state of Minnesota in 2014?
We've got to talk about what we believe. If we get into the partisan rancor, Alliance for a Better Minnesota will always spend more money making one of us, the five of us, look like the devil. But when you sit down across the table from people and you look them in the eye and you talk about what you believe and you tell them you care about their children and you tell them you care about the future and that you want them to have a healthy and prosperous life and have Minnesota be a place where they want their kids to grow up, where they want to retire, people relate to that. I'm convinced that the human condition is the same in War Road and Wayzata and Apple Valley and Rosemont and Des Moines and New York City and all over this world. People want opportunity. They want the ability to control their own lives and master something and do something good and head into their golden years with a sense of purpose and having accomplished something. And the way that we get that is by limiting the control that government puts on us. And I think if we talk in terms like that to people, they're not going to care whether we're Republicans. They're going to vote for us because they believe what we believe.
Okay, Scott Honor. Scott? Great.
Well, I think we have to make sure that we show Minnesotans that we have a caring attitude, that we want to make all Minnesotans' lives better. We want that. I know we want that. And we have to make sure that we have a message that conveys that. I think the Republican Party as a whole in the country and in the state has done a fairly lousy job in marketing its message. And so, I actually think it's good news that the candidates up here all have a very similar approach about the priorities. And I think those priorities have to be around jobs, around education, around improving our healthcare system, around making sure that we do smart things to rein in the government spending and you know, tackle the pension plan and do things that make the state better for everyone. And so if we have that message and we work together and we make sure that we work in a cohesive way, we'll win this state back.
Jeff Johnson?
I think we win by sharing a vision that actually inspires voters, not just Republican voters, but all voters. So I know a vision of a state where we actually celebrate success rather than look down upon it, and where every child has the opportunity for a great education, not just some of our kids, and where the most vulnerable among us are treated with dignity and not just herded into ineffective government programs, but actually given access to the same private market system that we all walk in. So they're at the same level as us, rather than some level underneath. My vision is of a state where government isn't looking for more money, but looking for ways to unleash the innovative power and the entrepreneurial creativeness of individuals, because those are the people who will actually grow the economy and make us all more prosperous. So really it comes down to sharing a vision that doesn't come across as partisan, and frankly isn't partisan, and actually inspires people.
Rob Farnsworth. Rob?
Well, we can win if you select Rob Farnsworth as your candidate. Imagine what the parents of high school students would say if we had an education system that every graduate could walk out of high school with 2 years of college paid for at no extra cost to the taxpayers of Minnesota, or a technical degree. That's a big selling point. If we reform education, we're going to get a lot of parents that say, wow, they're saving me $20,000 a year in tuition that I don't have to pay. Another area that we can win, and this is the only area that I bring this strength into the race, is the same way that Chip Kravac won in 2010. Chip was a union member. Chip was a union steward. Now, I know how Republicans feel about union members. Over 25% of people in Minnesota either are in a union, are retired union members, are the spouse of a union member, or are the adult child of a union member. And as a Republican Party, we are writing that group off. I'm the only candidate, just like Congressman Kravac did, that can go after that group and actually expand our party.
Good sellers.
Thanks. The first way we can, and the question was specifically, how do we appeal to those folks? My grandma as a kid, and I'm sure she probably knew what business I was going to get into, said, the good Lord gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. You should use them in proportion, Kurt. We should go out and listen to Minnesotans. I've done that. One of the best lines I ever got, and these guys are sick of hearing, is I got from a business owner, a contractor. He said, Kurt, get government off my back, out of my pocket, out of my way, and I will build my company the way I want, and I will be successful. In turn, our whole state will be successful. That's what we got to do, and then we have to be a lot like the Minnesotans. We're going to ask for votes. I'm a middle-class dad. I coach my kids. Baseball team, football team. I sit at dance lessons and talk to the dance moms who are there about what's important to them. And it's careers. It's an opportunity for their kid to go to school, maybe not go to college. Maybe they want to go to technical school, or maybe they want to study abroad and then come back. Maybe they want to take 2 years and help the family business. But you listen first. Instead of being a windbag politician telling everybody what they should be doing, you listen first and then you act. I think that's the way we appeal to Democrats, Independents, and Republicans.
Okay, thank you. And next question is maybe a little more specific. Let's see, we'll start with Rob. Rob, would you sign a bill that would legalize medical marijuana use?
That's simple, yes. If somebody's dying of cancer and their doctor says that marijuana is the only thing that will ease their suffering, who am I to say that they shouldn't have it? Morphine, which is 100 times more addictive than marijuana, is legal in Minnesota. Why wouldn't we consider it? I'm not a medical expert. I'm not going to say that whether something is medically necessary or not. I think we should put that in the hands of our doctors. So I am in favor, not of people being able to grow their own. You know, they would have to buy it at a pharmacy just like anybody buys any controlled substances. But I am in favor of it, yes.
Okay, Kurt Zellers?
Thanks. I would not. In talking with the business community, but with talking more importantly with law enforcement, we haven't seen in these states where it has been legal, whether or not it's been controlled, creates a whole new system of driving while impaired. It's not like having 4 or 5 beers and knowing where you're at. It creates a system that is yet to be proven to be safe or to be manageable. As far as some of the folks that need medical marijuana, my grandmother passed away from liver cancer. It's nothing more painful because the body starves itself. If I would have thought that that would have been the one thing that would have helped her, absolutely. But it's not something that her doctor recommended to her. It wasn't something that was going to ease her pain. I think once the technology catches up, we won't need to have the debate about whether or not cancer patients need a joint or whether or not they need medical care. I don't think it's a proven system. Law enforcement hasn't been able to get their arms around it yet. We should listen to the experts.
Scott Hunter.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I would not sign that law. This gets at a little bit, how would I govern in the first place? You know, I don't think I have all the answers. But what I do know is how to go seek good expertise and get good input and make decisions based on that. On this issue, I've taken some time to, speak with folks that know something about the issue, because I really don't. But in talking to medical professionals and law enforcement professionals, what I've heard is that there's not a compelling reason to say that this law is necessary as the only way to make people's lives better, and that there is really a law enforcement issue around it that's smart, and it's one that I listen to, and after hearing that input, that's my view on this issue.
David Thompson?
You know, this is a tough one for us conservatives because my libertarian instincts kind of come into conflict with, to some degree, my social conservatism. So my answer is yes, I would sign it if we had a way to control the production and distribution. That's the difference between a morphine and pot. Is with marijuana, it can be grown and distributed in a way that's very difficult to control. So before I would sign such a thing, I would have to be convinced that could be controlled, because otherwise we could have this stuff grown willy-nilly, smoked by all kinds of people. They become unclear in their thinking and unable to reason, and we get enough Democrats. Yeah.
That was good, David.
That was the first applause of the evening. Nice job. I'm in the same boat, and yes, I would if it were, if not the strictest bills in the nation. They just passed and signed such a bill in Illinois, and that's something that I could sign because it makes it nearly impossible to take that bill and turn it into something that produces recreational use, which I would have no interest whatsoever in signing. And for me, it matches my philosophy about healthcare. Decisions about healthcare, as much as possible, should be made between a doctor and a patient. And the insurance companies and the government should have as little to do as possible with that. So I would likely sign it if it were extremely strict.
Okay. The next question that has been given to me sort of as a preamble, and I'll read it. I think Mark Dayton and Barack Obama are either brothers or at very least educated together in the community organizer curriculum. They are both concentrating on rooting the free enterprise capitalistic society that has been the hallmark of American success: high taxes, big spending, entitlements, and in general, all-encompassing government control. The liberal agenda is or will be driving businesses and families out of Minnesota. So here's the question. As governor of Minnesota, what can you do, and how will you change the mentality of our state's low-information voter-citizen to reestablish the concept of free market enterprise and liberty-focused leadership that will turn our state around? Is that perfectly clear? And I would read it again if you want. It's rather long. Everybody okay with it? All right, let's go, let's start with Rob here. Rob?
Here, I thought I ducked out on the tough question having to go first. I was just laughing at Scott inside my head.
You know, I think it's time for the state to take back our liberties.
Here's a couple of examples. The federal government says we want to control your education, and they dole out money and say, if you do what we say, here's a little bit of money. Well, let's take our liberty back. Let's say, thanks but no thanks. We provided the best education in the world before 1967 when you started giving us this money, and we will provide the best education after we stop taking it. If we stop taking their handouts, we don't have to follow all of the rules and mandates that come with it. And I think the reality is the federal government is going broke. The handouts are going to stop, so we might as well learn to live within our means now before they stop when we're not prepared, and that's going to help us to be prepared. And one thing I do want to say is that I think it's a disgrace that we have a governor that has said nothing about the fact that the NSA is spying on almost every single one of his citizens, and he has said nothing about it.
Okay, let's crisscross to David Thompson.
Education reform. Education reform? How's that going to change the way people think about economics and capitalism? It's because right now, the vast majority of our students are educated in a system that is biased against free markets and biased in favor of controlling free markets and controlling entrepreneurs and business. So along with having an increase in performance in our schools, true education choice and reform will also create a diversity of thought. It'll allow for schools to start up that are teaching the idea of the virtues of freedom, the virtues of free markets, the virtues of capitalism. So I believe that really, at the heart and soul of changing people's thoughts about our economic system in the long run, is getting an education system that does not have a monopoly on educating all of our children. The recently named Teacher of the Year said one of the things that teachers are for is to protect kids against the tyranny of the 1%. Are you kidding me? Now it is the job of teachers to engage in that kind of, what I'll call it, Marxism. It's crazy.
Let's go to Jeff. Jeff?
I think the way that you change people's minds and their hearts about the free market and capitalism is we have to do a much better job of as a party of not just talking to ourselves. I think we do that a lot. We're really good at speaking conservative principles to conservatives, but we have to do a better job of thinking what I call outside in, and figure out what it is to the non-Republicans out there, the everyday people, the folks who don't pay much attention, what it is that matters to them. Because in many cases, it's probably different things than what matter to us, and that's what we need to speak to. We have to make our message very relevant to people's everyday lives. And over time, if you're constantly hammering on that, I think we can actually make progress.
Scott?
Governor Dayton defined success by growing government. I'll define success by growing jobs. Our state is underachieving its potential. That's unacceptable. Our African American community has amongst the highest unemployment rate in the country. We rank dead last in the United States in terms of minority graduation rates. That's on Minnesotan. I'll start by leading the party in having a communication plan that highlights for Minnesotans what's going on now, what results are we getting today, what's our plan to get better results, and get everyone working together and get the citizens of the state working behind us to get better results. So it's got to start with a smart communications plan and have everyone realize that we got to work together to have Minnesota achieve its full potential.
Kurt Zellers.
But I believe the question is, how do you appeal to the low information voter? And Rush Limbaugh's right. Unfortunately, more and more of our society is becoming the low information voter. You use the examples, again, back to my grandma's principle, you use your 2 ears and your one mouth, you listen. And if you listen to those folks, they'll tell you what it is. It is making sure that we are going to be a successful economy. And it's not on one of us up here talking. I go get the contractor from Turk Manufacturing and I say, here's what he said to me, get government out of my way, off my back, and out of my pocket, and I'll build my business. I'll employ 5 more people or 100 more people. But if government is constantly the yoke over our neck or the anchor behind us pulling us down, we're not going to be successful. Examples from real life Minnesotans, those hardworking business women and men who are out there each and every day doing it, that's who the people need to hear from. They don't need to hear from politicians. This is the guy I'm going to help. This is the businesswoman who starts a daycare center in her own home who's been successful, that's who we want to empower. As Republicans, when we appeal to Minnesotans and Americans on our ideas, we're successful. When we bash the other guy, it puts us one step behind.
Okay, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we have been gifted tonight, I think, and as I stand up here looking at these 5 individuals, I think our Republican Party is in pretty good shape. Right? I just want to thank each and every one of you for not only coming down tonight, but for your thoughtful answers. I think we all became a little bit more enlightened about who you are and what you stand for, and I think to some great degree it brought us all together in the sense of our mission, and that mission is to win that corner office in 2014. And whoever carries that flag, I don't know, but amongst the 5 people here, we've got some good flag carriers, and we will do just fine. So, thank you so much. Let's give another hand, because we're going to go into the so-called speed dating now. That's a rather trendy thing for a senator, but speed dating at the table, that will be fun. Fran, you want to give them some instructions?
Fran will in about 30 seconds.
Okay.
I just want to mention, thanks for coming out. This is a fundraiser, as you know. It's funny to listen to a bunch of Republicans talk about how things should be, because there is a funny thing that the Democrats reinstated, and that is the political refund program. This fundraiser is an appropriate use for that refund program. We were trying at the registration table to give those of you who were pre-registered or not the little EP3 form, it's called, that indicates that you've given an appropriate donation. And there's a piece of paper that tells you that basically the instructions for what to do with that form. You have to send it into the state, and then in a few weeks they send you a check back. If you did not get yours, it's out there, and we'll get it for you. So before you leave tonight, if you want it, please help us help you. It is available.
Okay, we are going to speed date, and my impression is all 5 of these men are worth speed dating. And I think to have opportunities to engage in a smaller group, as I said some time ago, I believe everybody here has got a number. If you didn't, then take care of yourself, find a table. We're going to take a break for probably 5 minutes or so. There is a bar open, there's some goodies in the back there. I'm going to ring a bell when it's time to go to your tables, okay? You'll spend about 8 minutes there. I'll ring the bell again or shout or whatever I need to do, and then you'll move to the next table. As I said, 1 will go to 2, 2 to 3, and then 5 will go to 1. And we'll do that 5 times so that each one of you has an opportunity in a small group to visit with these fine candidates that you've heard from now. So, let's take a 5-minute break, stretch, hit the bar, whatever you'd like, and then I'll ring the bell to start the program.